On a freezing November night in Chicago, a wealthy businessman stepped out of a restaurant with no idea his life was about to change forever. 3 little girls, triplets, approached him, not for money, not for toys, but for the leftovers in his hands. Food they desperately needed for their sick mother waiting at home. That simple request would unravel a story of dignity, compassion, and sacrifice, forcing him to choose between his fortune and his humanity. Nathan Hale was 28 years old and worth more money than most small countries. His empire stretched across 3 continents. His name whispered in boardrooms from Manhattan to Tokyo. Yet on that bitter November night in Chicago, as he stepped out of La Bernardine with the taste of $100 wine still on his tongue, he felt as empty as the winter sky above. The deal he'd just closed would make him another $10 million by Christmas. The handshakes had been firm, the contracts signed in gold ink, the champagne perfectly chilled. But as Nathan pulled his cashmere coat tighter against the wind, something gnawed at him, a hunger that no amount of money could feed. He was walking to his Bentley when he saw them. 3 shadows huddled in the mouth of an alley like lost sparrows, seeking shelter. At first he thought they were bundles of discarded clothing. But then one of the shadows moved, and Nathan's world tilted on its axis. They were children. 3 little girls, identical in their thinness, identical in their desperation. Triplets, he realized. Born into a world that had forgotten them before they'd even learned to walk. The eldest, she couldn't have been more than 6 stepped forward. Her coat was threadbare, held together by safety pins and prayers. Her sisters cowered behind her, their eyes like dark pools reflecting the streetlights. "Mister," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind, "do you have any leftovers? Our mommy's sick, and we don't have dinner tonight." Nathan stood, frozen. In his hand was a white styrofoam container, half a steak he'd barely touched, sides of vegetables he'd pushed around his plate while discussing profit margins. Food that would have been thrown away without a second thought. Time stretched like taffy. Here was this little girl, no taller than his waist, asking not for money, not for toys, but for his scraps, his unwanted food. The humility of it, the pure necessity, hit him like a physical blow. His fingers trembled as he handed her the container. The girl's face lit up like Christmas morning, and she clutched the food to her chest as if it were made of diamonds. "Thank you, mister. Thank you so much." The 3 sisters scurried away, their worn shoes slapping against the wet pavement. Nathan watched until they disappeared around the corner, leaving him alone with the echo of their gratitude and the sudden, crushing weight of his own abundance that night. In his penthouse apartment 40 stories above the city, Nathan stared out at the glittering lights below. Each light was a life, he realized. A story, a family, and somewhere out there in the darkness, 3 little girls were sharing his leftover steak by the light of a dying candle. He'd never learn their names. He didn't know where they lived. Their faces were burned into his memory like brands. On his conscience, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them 3 angels in rags, begging for his scraps while he lived in a tower made of other people's money. By dawn, Nathan knew what he had to do. For 3 days, Nathan combed the streets around the restaurant. He walked every alley, peered into every doorway, asked every shopkeeper if they'd seen 3 little girls who looked like mirror images of each other. On the 4th day, old Mrs. Chen, who ran the corner bodega, pointed him toward Ashland Avenue. "Those babies," she said, shaking her gray head, "live above the broken laundromat with their mama. Poor souls. The mother's been sick for months." Nathan's heart hammered as he climbed the narrow stairs to the 2nd floor. The building reeked of mildew and broken dreams. Paint peeled from the walls like dying skin, and the floorboards groaned under his feet. He knocked on apartment to B. Footsteps shuffled behind the door, hesitant and wary. "Who is it?" The voice was a woman's, rough with exhaustion and suspicion. "My name is Nathan. I met your daughters a few nights ago, near the restaurant district." Through the gap, Nathan saw a slice of a face, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much. This was their mother. Rachel, though he wouldn't learn her name for several more minutes. "What do you want?" "I brought groceries," Nathan said. hefting the bags he'd filled at the nearby market. For the girls, the door slammed shut. Nathan heard whispered arguments, the sound of small feet running across squeaky floors. When the door opened again, the chain was still in place. "We don't take charity," Rachel said. But Nathan could hear the war being fought in her voice, pride battling with desperation, dignity wrestling with hunger. "It's not charity," Nathan lied smoothly. "I bought too much food. It'll go bad if someone doesn't eat it." Rachel studied him through the crack in the door. Nathan felt as if she were reading his soul, weighing his words against his intentions. Finally, slowly, she unhooked the chain. The apartment was smaller than Nathan's walk-in closet. A single room served as kitchen, living room, and bedroom, all at once. 3 small mattresses lay on the floor, covered with thin blankets that had been patched and repatched. The walls were bare except for children's drawings, crayon pictures of houses with gardens and families. Holding hands under smiling suns, the triplets peeked out from behind their mother's legs. In the dim light of the apartment, Nathan could see them clearly for the first time. Emma, the brave one who'd asked for his leftovers. Lily, who clutched a one-armed doll like a talisman. And Sophie, the smallest, who hadn't spoken a word since he'd arrived. "Girls," Rachel said quietly, "thank the man, and then wash up for dinner." As Nathan watched them divide the groceries with mathematical precision, each taking exactly 1/3, even down to the carrots, his throat tightened. These weren't just hungry children. They were a family, bound by love so fierce it hurt to witness. "Are you sick?" Nathan asked Rachel as the girls set the table with mismatched plates. "I'm getting better," she said. But Nathan noticed how she gripped the back of a chair for support, how her breathing came shallow and quick. "What kind of work do you do?" "I was a teacher before ... She gestured vaguely at the apartment, at her pale complexion, at the weight of whatever illness had stolen her strength and her job. "Now I clean office buildings at night, when I can." Nathan's mind raced. A teacher. Of course she was a teacher. He could see it in the way the girls sat straight in their chairs, in their careful manners, despite their circumstances, in the way they shared everything equally without being asked. "The night cleaning pays well?" Rachel's laugh was sharp as broken glass. $12 an hour? When there's work? Nathan did the math instantly. $12 an hour, maybe 20 hours a week if she was lucky. $240. Not even enough to cover rent, let alone food, medicine, clothes for 3 growing girls. As he prepared to leave, Emma tugged on his coat. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. Nathan looked down at her upturned face, at the trust shining in her eyes despite everything life had thrown at her small shoulders. "Would you like me to?" All 3 girls nodded, even shy Sophie. "Then I'll be back tomorrow," Nathan promised. And for the first time in months, Rachel almost smiled. Asterisk days became weeks. Nathan found himself restructuring his entire life around visits to apartment to be. He'd leave board meetings early, cancel dinner appointments, skip networking events all, to spend an hour or 2 in that cramped room that somehow felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. He learned their routines, their dreams, their fears. Emma wanted to be a doctor so she could fix her mother. Lily dreamed of owning a pet store full of cats and dogs that needed homes. Sophie, when she finally started talking to him, whispered that she wanted to build houses for families who didn't have any. Rachel began to trust him, piece by careful piece. She told him about her husband, the girl's father who had died in Afghanistan when they were barely walking. About the diagnosis of lupus that had stolen her strength and her teaching job. Used to have a plan, she said one evening, as they watched the girls play with dolls Nathan had brought. College funds, retirement savings, a house with a backyard. Funny how fast it all disappears. Nathan wanted to write a check that would solve everything. He had the money, God knows he had the money, but he'd learned enough about Rachel to know she'd tear it up before he finished signing his name. Instead, he found her work. Real work, with dignity attached. He'd quietly purchased the building that housed the struggling community center where the girls sometimes played. And he needed someone to run their new after-school program. "It pays $18 an hour," he told Rachel, careful to keep his voice casual and there's health insurance. Rachel's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing this? Nathan looked at the triplets, curled up together on their shared mattress, reading a book by the light of a lamp he'd replaced. Because they asked for my leftovers, he said simply. And I realized I'd been living on scraps my whole life. For 2 months, everything was perfect. Rachel's color returned. The girls grew taller, their cheeks filled out, their laughter came easier. Nathan taught them to play chess, helped with homework, listened to their bedtime stories about magical kingdoms where everyone had enough to eat. He was falling in love not with Rachel, though he cared for her deeply, but with this life. This real, messy, beautiful life, where a man's worth wasn't measured in stock prices, but in the number of times he could make 3 little girls giggle. Then came the betrayal. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Quarterly review of company properties, new acquisitions, upcoming developments. Nathan sat at the head of the mahogany table, half listening to his VP drone about profit projections and construction timelines. The Grove Street project is moving forward, his development director announced, spreading blueprints across the table. Demolition begins next month. We'll finally clear out that eyesore and build something worthwhile. Nathan's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the conference room floor. Grove Street. Ashland and Grove, where a crumbling laundromat sat beneath an apartment that housed the only family he'd ever known, sir. Are you all right? Nathan stared at the blueprints luxury condos where apartment to be would soon be rubble. His company, his signature on the contracts, his money funding the destruction of everything he'd come to love. The room spun, voices around the table blurred. Someone was asking about insurance claims, about relocating the current tenants, about the profitability of the new development. Stop, Nathan whispered. Sir, stop everything. Cancel the project. Silence fell like a curtain. 12 men in expensive suits stared at their CEO as if he'd lost his mind. Nathan, his VP, said carefully, "We've invested $14 million. In this development, the permits alone cost." I said, "Cancel it." "We can't just, I own 60% of this company," Nathan said, his voice growing stronger. "Cancel the Grove Street project. Now." He left the meeting without another word, ignoring the eruption of voices behind him. He had to get to Rachel, had to tell her, he had to fix this. But it was too late. When Nathan climbed those familiar stairs, his heart was already breaking. The door, too, to be stood open. Inside, Rachel was folding the girls' clothes into garbage bags, her movements sharp and angry. 30 days, she said without looking up. That's what the notice gave us. 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Rachel. I don't. Her voice was ice and fire all at once. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I didn't know, Nathan said desperately. I swear to you, I didn't know my company owned this building. Rachel finally looked at him, and Nathan saw something die in her eyes. Your company? Your company owns this place. The triplets sat on their mattresses, watching the adults with the careful attention children develop when their world becomes unpredictable. Emma's arms were wrapped around her sisters, as if she could shield them from whatever storm was brewing. We're them, Rachel breathed. You're the people who throw families into the cold so you can build playgrounds for the rich. Rachel, please. Let me fix this. Fix it. Rachel's laugh was bitter as black coffee. You think you can fix destroying my children's home? You think you can write a check and make this disappear? Nathan reached for her, but she stepped back as if his touch would burn. Get out, she whispered. Please, just listen. Get out. Rachel's voice cracked like a whip. The triplets flinched, and Sophie began to cry. Nathan looked at the three. Little girls, his girls, he'd come to think of them, saw something that would haunt him forever. They were looking at him with the same expression they'd worn that first night in the alley. Look of children who'd been disappointed by the world so many times they expected nothing else. Emma was the one who broke his heart completely. She stood up, walked over to him, and very carefully handed him back the chess set he'd given her. Thank you for teaching us to play, she said with the devastating politeness of a child trying to be brave. but we probably won't have room for games where we're going. Asterisk that night, Nathan sat in his penthouse office, staring at the Grove Street development files spread across his desk. $14 million invested. Contracts signed, permits approved. 100 construction workers counting on the jobs. Investors expecting their returns. On his computer screen, the building plans for luxury condos that would sell for $500,000 each. The Grove. That's what they were calling it. Luxury living in the heart of the city. In his pocket, a business card for a homeless shelter, where Rachel was planning to take the girls. Nathan poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, the kind that costs more per bottle than most people made in a month. Tasted like Ashdod. His phone buzzed. Text messages from board members, from investors, from his own father, asking if he'd lost his mind. The Grove Street cancellation had sent shockwaves through the company. Stock prices were already dropping. Nathan closed his eyes and saw them. Again, 3 little girls sharing his leftover steak like it was a feast. Emma's careful division of groceries. Lily's whispered bedtime stories about cats who found homes. Sophie's shy smile when she finally spoke her first words to him. "Mr. Nathan, are you our friend?" He opened his laptop and began to type the email. Went to every board member, every major investor, every news outlet that covered his company, effective immediately. Enterprises is withdrawing from the Grove Street development project. We have determined that the displacement of current residents does not align with our corporate values or social responsibility commitments. The $14 million investment will be written off as a total loss. His finger hovered over the send button. One click would cost him more money than most people saw in a lifetime. It would damage his reputation, anger his investors, possibly trigger lawsuits. Nathan thought about Emma asking if he would come back. He thought about Sophie's drawings of happy families. He thought about Rachel's fierce love for her daughters, her dignity in the face of impossible choices. He clicked send. Then he drove to Grove Street. The apartment was dark when Nathan climbed the stairs. It was past midnight, but he could see light leaking from under the door of 2B. Inside, he could hear Rachel's voice, soft and low, reading a bedtime story to her daughters. He sat on the stairs and listened. The story was about 3 princesses, sisters who were lost in a dark forest, searching for the castle where they belonged. Each sister had a special gift. One was brave, one was kind, one could see beauty in broken things. Together, they found their way home. When the story ended and the apartment fell quiet, Nathan knocked. Rachel opened the door, still dressed, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. She looked at him with something between surprise and wariness. "Late," she said. "I canceled it," Nathan said simply. "The development. I canceled the whole thing." Rachel stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Grove Street, the condos, all of it. Canceled. You can stay. That's not. You can't just ... Rachel shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. "Nathan, that doesn't make sense. Companies don't just cancel million-dollar projects. This one did. Why?" Nathan looked past her into the apartment, where he could see the corners of 3 small mattresses in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Because a little girl asked me for my leftovers, and I realized I'd been starving my whole life." Rachel opened the door wider, studying his face in the hallway light. "How much did it cost you? $14 million? The number hung in the air between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. $14 million, Rachel repeated slowly. "For us?" "For them," Nathan said, nodding toward the sleeping girls. "For you? For the idea that some things are worth more than money." Rachel's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheek. Stares she'd been holding back for months, maybe years. "Nathan, I can't. We can't repay that. Not ever." "I don't want you to repay it," Nathan said quietly. "I want you to let me be part of this family, if you'll have me." But canceling the project was only the beginning of Nathan's troubles. Within a week, his board of directors called an emergency meeting. Investors were furious. The company's stock dropped 20%. Lawsuits were filed. Nathan's own father? Man who'd built the company. Nathan now demanded an explanation. You threw away $14 million for what? His father thundered across the conference table. For some woman and her kids. For what's right, Nathan said simply. Right. His father's face turned purple. Right doesn't pay salaries, Nathan. Right doesn't fund pension plans or keep this company solvent. You have responsibilities. I know my responsibilities, Nathan said, standing. My first responsibility is to be a human being, not just a profit machine. The boardroom erupted. Voices raised, accusations flew, threats were made. Nathan listened to it all with the strange calm of a man who'd finally found his conscience. 3 board members resigned that day. His father disowned him publicly. The business press called him everything from recklessly philanthropic to mentally unstable. But none of that mattered the next morning when Nathan knocked on Rachel's door and heard 3 little voices shout, "Mr. Nathan's here." He'd lost $14 million and gained something priceless. The attacks on Nathan and his company intensified. Competitors circled like vultures, trying to poach his clients. Investors pulled funding from other projects. Nathan's personal wealth dropped by 30% in 2 months, but something else was happening too. Letters began arriving at his office, hundreds of them, then thousands. Stories from people who'd read about his choice, who'd been inspired by his decision to put humanity over profit. A group of teachers started a crowdfunding campaign called the Nathan Challenge, encouraging CEOs to spend a day with the families their business decisions affected. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell his story. A children's book author wrote a tale about 3 princesses and the knight who chose love over gold. Rachel, meanwhile, was transforming the community center Nathan had purchased. What had started as an after-school program became a beacon for struggling families throughout the neighborhood. She created art classes, tutoring programs, support groups for single mothers. The building buzzed with life and hope. Nathan spent his evenings there, not as the wealthy benefactor, but as Mr. Nathan, the man who helped with homework, fixed broken toys, and listened to children's dreams with the attention most people reserved. For business proposals, Emma was excelling in school, her natural leadership blossoming as she helped younger children with their reading. Lily had convinced Nathan to let her start a small pet adoption corner in the community center, where she matched homeless animals with loving families. Sophie, the quiet one, revealed a gift for seeing beauty in discarded things turning trash into art, broken furniture into treasures. For 6 months, Nathan lived in a bubble of purpose and joy. He'd found his calling, his family, his reason for being. Then the universe decided to test him one more time. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in April. Nathan was at the community center helping Sophie paint a mural of the 3 princess sisters when his assistant tracked him down. "Nathan, you need to see this." The news was devastating. A hostile takeover. While Nathan had been playing father figure and community organizer, a group of his former board members had conspired with his biggest competitor to buy out enough stockholders to seize control of Hale Enterprises. They're offering shareholders 40% above market value, his lawyer explained over the phone. Most of them are taking the deal. You could lose controlling interest by Friday. Nathan felt the walls closing in. Without his company, he'd have no income, no resources. No way to maintain the community center or support the dozens of families who now depended on it. "There's more," his lawyer continued grimly. "The new ownership group's first order of business, reviving the Grove Street development. They've already filed new permits." Nathan's blood turned to ice. "They can't do that. I canceled that project, Nathan. If they take control of the company, they can do whatever they want, including evicting every tenant in every building you own." That evening, Nathan sat with Rachel in the community center's kitchen while the girls played in the next room. He'd told her everything about the takeover, about Grove Street, but the very real possibility that everything they'd built together could disappear. "So you could lose it all?" Rachel said quietly. "I could lose the company, yes? But I won't. Lose what matters." Rachel looked through the doorway at her daughters, who were putting on a puppet show for the other children. "Nathan, you should fight for your company. Shouldn't lose everything because of us. I'm not losing anything because of you, Nathan said firmly. I found everything because of you. But even as he spoke, Nathan knew he was facing an impossible choice. Fight for his company and probably lose both it and his ability to help the families who needed him. Or let it go and watch the new owners destroy everything he'd tried to protect. That night, he lay awake in his penthouse for the last time, staring at the city lights and wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Friday. Morning arrived gray and cold. Nathan dressed in his best suit armor for the battle ahead. But instead of heading to the emergency board meeting where the vote would take place, he drove to Grove Street. The community center was buzzing with activity. Children arriving for the breakfast program Rachel had started. Elderly residents gathering for their morning exercise class. Teenagers heading to the computer lab Nathan had funded. He found Rachel in her office, surrounded by paperwork and half-eaten toast. "Shouldn't you be at your meeting?" she asked. "In a minute, Nathan," I said. "First, I have something to tell you." He sat across from her desk, in the same chair where dozens of struggling parents had sat, pouring out their hearts to this woman who'd made helping others her life's work. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fighting for the company." Rachel leaned forward, and I realized something. I spent my whole life building an empire, and I was miserable. I spent 6 months building a family, and I've never been happier. So the question isn't whether I should fight to keep my company. The question is whether I should fight to keep my family. Understanding dawned in Rachel's eyes. "Nathan, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that some things are worth more than money. Some fights are worth losing everything for." Nathan stood and walked to the window, looking out at Grove Street, at the broken sidewalks and patched buildings. At the children walking to school with backpacks Rachel had bought with community center funds, at the old men playing checkers. In the small park Nathan had helped create. "If they take my company," he said, "they'll destroy all of this. They'll tear down these buildings and scatter these families like leaves in the wind. Unless what?" Nathan turned back to Rachel, his decision crystallizing. "Unless I make sure they can't." The plan was audacious and probably insane. Instead of fighting the takeover, Nathan would accelerate it, but with a twist. He'd sell his remaining shares directly to the community, creating a trust fund that would purchase every building in a 6-block radius. The residents would become the owners of their own neighborhood. It would cost him everything: his company, his fortune, his status. He'd be left with almost nothing. "Nathan," Rachel said softly, "that's your entire life's work." Watching Emma through the window as she helped a younger child tie his shoes. "My life's work is just beginning." Before Nathan could move forward with his audacious plan, the ghosts of his past came calling. His father, Richard Hale, the man who'd built the company from nothing and handed it to his son like a crowner, arrived at the community center on a gray October morning. Nathan was in the basement, teaching a group of teenagers basic electrical work, when Rachel appeared at the top of the stairs. "Nathan," she called down, her voice carefully neutral. "You have a visitor." Richard Hale stood in the community center's main room, like a foreign dignitary visiting a third-world country. His $1,000 suit looked absurdly out of place among the mismatched furniture and children's artwork. He surveyed the space with the expression of a man trying to understand a language he'd never learned. "So this is what you traded my life's work for," Richard said without preamble. Nathan wiped his hands on a shop rag, noting how his father's eyes lingered on his calloused palms, his work-stained clothes. "Hello, Dad." "Don't hello, Dad, me. You have any idea what you've done? The company's stock has dropped 40%. 3 major clients have pulled their contracts. The board is talking about litigation." "The board voted me out," Nathan reminded him quietly. "What I do now isn't their concern. What you do now?" Richard's voice rose, causing several children to look over with curious eyes. "Nathan, you're about to destroy everything I built, everything I sacrificed for, everything I wanted to leave you." Nathan guided his father toward Rachel's office, away from small ears that didn't need to hear this conversation. Once the door closed, the two men faced each other across a desk covered with community program schedules and children's birthday party plans. "Tell me why," Richard said, and for the first time, Nathan heard something beyond anger in his father's voice. He heard pain. "I was dying, Dad," Nathan said simply, slowly, quietly, but surely. "I had everything you taught me to want, and I was emptier than a broken promise. You had purpose. You had responsibility. You employed 3,000 people. Had a job that was killing my soul." Richard slammed his hand on the desk, making Rachel's coffee mug jump. "Soul? What kind of New Age nonsense is that? Your soul doesn't pay mortgages, Nathan. Your soul doesn't keep families fed, doesn't it?" Nathan gestured toward the window where Emma was visible in the garden, teaching a group of kindergartners how to plant bulbs for spring flowers. "Dad, look around you. Really look. These families are fed. These children have hope. This community is thriving. And it's all because I finally listened to my soul instead of my bank account." Richard followed his gaze, and Nathan watched his father's face soften almost imperceptibly as he saw Emma patiently guide a tiny boy's hands around a flower bulb. "Those aren't your children," Richard said, but his voice had lost its edge. The two men stood in silence, watching the tableau outside. Richard's shoulders seemed to slump, and for the first time in Nathan's memory, his father looked old. "I taught you to be strong," Richard said finally. "I taught you to win." Did Nathan agreed. "But you never taught me what I was supposed to win. Money, security, respect. I have all those things, Dad, just not the way you meant." Richard turned from the window, studying his son's face. "You're happy," he said, and it sounded like an accusation. "I'm happy, even though you're poor now?" Nathan considered this. His bank account held less than $5,000. His apartment was smaller than his old closet. He owned 2 pairs of jeans, 3 work shirts, and a single suit for special occasions. "I'm not poor, Dad. I'm rich in ways that matter." Richard was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Do you really believe that? Or are you trying to convince yourself that this martyrdom was worth it?" It was a fair question, and Nathan gave it the consideration it deserved. 6 months ago, I might have been trying to convince myself. But now I know the difference between being comfortable and being complete. Before Richard could respond, a knock came at the office door. Sophie's voice piped up. "Mr. Nathan? Mrs. Rodriguez needs help with her sink again. And Lily says there's a kitten stuck under the building. Emma wants to know if you can help her with her math homework after dinner." Nathan smiled at the litany of small emergencies that made up his days now. "I'll be right there, sweetheart." "Who is that?" Richard asked. "My daughter." "One of them." "Nathan, Sophie," Nathan called through the door. "Come meet your grandfather?"
Oh.
The door opened slowly, and Sophie peered in with her characteristic shyness. She was holding a painting she'd been working on, a portrait of their family. All 5 of them standing in front of the community center. "This is my dad's daddy," Rachel had apparently explained. Because Sophie approached Richard with the careful politeness reserved for very important strangers. "Hello," she said quietly, then held up her painting. "Made this for our refrigerator, but you can look at it if you want." Richard took the painting with hands that trembled slightly. Nathan watched his father's face as he studied Sophie's artwork, the careful way she'd painted each face. The bright colors she'd used for their clothing, the garden blooming behind them. "You made this?" Richard asked. Sophie nodded. "My mama, and that's my daddy Nathan. And those are my sisters Emma and Lily. We're a family." "I can see that," Richard said softly. "It's beautiful." Sophie beamed, then scampered away to find Lily and the trapped kitten. Richard stared at the painting for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She called you Daddy," he whispered. "She calls me Daddy." "Because I show up," Nathan said. "Every day, for everything that matters." Richard set the painting carefully on Rachel's desk. "I showed up for you, Nathan. Every day. Every game, every school play, every you showed up for my achievements," Nathan said gently. "But did you ever show up for my failures? My fears? My questions about whether any of it mattered?" The silence stretched between them, filled with 30 years of missed connections and misunderstood priorities. "I wanted to give you the world," Richard said finally. "You did, Dad. but I wanted to give it back. Asterisk, 2 days after his father's visit, Nathan received a call that changed everything. The hostile takeover of Hale Enterprises wasn't just about profit, it was personal. The consortium buying up shares was led by Marcus Steinberg, Nathan's former college roommate and longtime rival. He's not just taking the company, Nathan's former assistant warned him over coffee. He's planning to systematically destroy everything you've built here, starting with evictions. In Nathan's blood chilled. Can't touch the community trust properties. I transferred ownership. He's challenging the transfers in court. Claims you weren't mentally competent when you made them. He's got psychiatrists willing to testify that your behavior indicates a psychological breakdown. The legal battle that followed was brutal. Nathan, who'd always avoided courthouse drama, found himself sitting through depositions where his former colleagues testified that his actions had been erratic and indicative of severe mental distress. Marcus himself took the stand, painting a picture of Nathan as a man who'd suffered a complete psychological collapse. He gave away $14 million to strangers, Marcus testified. He quit his job to become a handyman. These aren't the actions of a rational person. Nathan's lawyer fought back, bringing in witnesses from the community. Mrs. Rodriguez testified about how Nathan had helped her son get into college. Mr. Patterson spoke about the chess program that had given him reason to live after his wife's death. Rachel herself took the stand, her quiet dignity filling the courtroom as she described the transformation she'd witnessed. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Emma, now 12 and wise beyond her years, had asked to speak to the judge. Despite Nathan and Rachel's protests, she was determined to have her say. "Your Honor," Emma said, standing straight and tall in her best dress, "I know I'm just a kid, but I wanted to tell you about my dad." The courtroom fell silent. Marcus's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him quiet. "Mr. Nathan isn't crazy," Emma continued. "He's the smartest person I know. He taught me that being rich means having enough to share, showed me that being successful means making other people successful too. And he proved that being a grown-up means keeping your promises to kids, even when it's hard." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "The man who wants to take our buildings away, he thinks Mr. Nathan is sick because he chose us over money. But I think that man is the sick one. Because if you can't see that people are worth more than profits, then your eyes don't work right." The judge listened to every word. When Emma finished, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. The ruling came 3 weeks later. The judge found that Nathan's property transfers were legally valid and made by a person of sound mind. Moreover, she issued an injunction preventing any further attempts to challenge the community trust's ownership. "Hale's actions," the judge wrote in her decision, "represent not mental incompetence, but moral clarity. The court finds no evidence of psychological impairment, only evidence of a man choosing to live according to his values rather than his bank balance." Nathan wept when he read those words, not from relief, but from gratitude that someone in power had understood what he'd been trying to do. The victory came with a cost, though. Legal fees had drained what remained of Nathan's personal savings. Marcus's attacks had damaged several other programs Nathan had been trying to fund. The stress of the trial had triggered a relapse in Rachel's lupus, leaving her bedridden for 2 weeks. But the community rallied. Families Nathan had helped organize fundraising dinners. Local businesses donated supplies and services. The chess club held a tournament where the entry fees went toward legal costs, and children contributed, giving up allowances and piggy bank savings to help Mr. Nathan fight the bad man, watching his neighbors, his family, support him the way he'd supported them. Nathan understood something profound about the mathematics of love. Give it away, and it multiplies. Hoard it, and it dies. Asterisk 3 years after the legal battle. Nathan stood before a group of business students at Northwestern University, invited to speak about alternative models of corporate responsibility. He looked out at the eager faces, young men and women who reminded him of himself at their age. Hungry for success, and certain that money was the measure of all things. "How many of you want to be millionaires?" he asked. Every hand in the room shot up. "How many of you want to be happy?" The same hands rose, but more slowly this time, as if the students sensed a trap. Here's what I learned, Nathan said, leaning against the podium in his simple button-down shirt and kakiza, a far cry from the Armani suits of his corporate days. You can't be a millionaire and be happy. You can be happy and discover you're richer than any millionaire. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Hale, don't you think that's easy to say when you've already experienced wealth? Some of us come from poverty. We need financial security. Nathan nodded. It was a smart question, one he'd wrestled with himself. What's your name? Jessica. Jessica, tell me about your poverty. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. My family. We struggled when I was young. Sometimes we couldn't pay rent. I remember being hungry. I understand that hunger, Nathan said gently. But let me ask you something. In your family's hardest moments, what got you through? Jessica thought for a moment. We took care of each other. My mom worked 3 jobs, but she still helped me with homework. My brother shared his lunch money with me when I forgot mine. We didn't have much, but we had each other. So you were rich, Nathan said simply. Rich? Jessica looked confused. We could barely afford groceries. You were rich in the things that matter. You had people who would sacrifice for you. You had love that showed up in action, not just words. You had a family that proved every day that you were worth fighting for. Students, his voice growing more passionate. I lived in a $40 million penthouse, and I was poorer than Jessica's family ever was, because I had no one who would sacrifice anything for me, no one who saw me as more than a profit center. No one who loved me enough to tell me when I was wrong. A young man in the back raised his hand. But you could have had that and kept your money. Could have just donated some of your wealth without giving it all away. Could I? Nathan asked. Let me tell you about my former life. I'd write checks to charities and feel good about myself for exactly as long as it took to sign my name. Then I'd go back to making money off the same systems that created the problems I'd just donated to solve. Nathan paused, thinking of Emma's lesson about planting seeds. Real change doesn't come from throwing money at problems from a distance. It comes from getting your hands dirty, from living close enough to the problem that you can't ignore it anymore. But you lost everything, another student protested. Did I? Nathan smiled. Last week, I helped a teenage mother graduate high school. Yesterday, I taught a group of kids how to build a bookshelf for their classroom. Tonight, I'm going home to help my daughters with their science project about growing plants without soil. He gestured toward the window where snow was beginning to fall. In a few hours, I'll sit around a dinner table with people who love me, not because of what I can buy them, but because of who I am when nobody's watching. Tell me which version of Nathan Hale sounds richer to you? The questions continued for another hour. Some students were skeptical, others inspired. Most were simply confused by the idea that success could be measured in anything other than dollars. As Nathan was packing up his notes, Jessica approached him. There, Hale, she said quietly. I've been thinking about what you said, about my family being rich, and I called my mom after class. Told her I loved her. Thanked her for all those 3-job years. Jessica's eyes were bright with tears. She cried, said no one had thanked her for that in 20 years. Nathan's throat tightened. How did it feel? Like I'd found something I didn't know. I'd lost. Nathan drove home through the snowy streets, Jessica's words echoing in his mind. This was how change really happened, not through grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but through one person at a time, remembering what love looked like. When it rolled up its sleeves and got to work, asterisk. November 15th marked 2 years since Nathan first met the triplets in that alley. Rachel had suggested a quiet celebration, just the family, maybe cake and candles in their kitchen. But the girls had other ideas. We want to have a party. For everyone, Emma announced over breakfast. For all the families Mr. Nathan helped. A gratitude party, Lily added. Using a phrase she'd learned from one of Rachel's community workshops, Sophie, now 9 and less shy but still thoughtful, looked up from her cereal. Can we invite the mean man too? What mean man? Nathan asked. One who tried to take our homes away. Maybe if he comes to the party, he'll understand why we love it here. Nathan exchanged glances with Rachel. Sophie was talking about Marcus Steinberg, whose legal challenges had finally been defeated but who continued to make hostile moves against anything Nathan was involved with. Sweetheart, Rachel said gently. Some people aren't ready to understand. Yet, but Mr. Nathan wasn't ready either, Sophie pointed out with devastating logic. And look what happened when we were nice to him. The party planning consumed the entire community for weeks. Mrs. Chen offered to cater with dishes from her restaurant. The teenagers Nathan had been teaching electrical work set up lights in the community garden. Mr. Patterson organized a chess tournament. The Johnson twins created a talent show where families could share their stories. Nathan watched the preparations with amazement. People had so little, yet they were giving everything they had to celebrate. What? His transformation. Their community? The simple miracle of still being together? The answer came to him as he watched Lily create invitations by hand. Carefully writing each family's name in her best cursive, they were celebrating the radical idea that people mattered more than profit. To everyone's surprise, Marcus Steinberg actually showed up. He arrived just as the party was hitting its stride, stepping out of a black sedan like a storm cloud in an expensive suit. The garden fell quiet as people recognized him from the newspaper photos during the legal battle. Nathan felt his jaw tighten. Out. But before he could move, Sophie was already walking toward Marcus with the fearless confidence of a child who'd been taught that every stranger was just a friend she hadn't met yet. Are you the mean man? She asked without preamble. Marcus looked down at her, clearly unprepared for such directness. What, Emma says you're the man who tried to make us move? Away. But you don't look mean. You look sad. Nathan hurried over, ready to intervene, but Sophie was already taking Marcus's hand. Do you want to see my garden? She asked. I grew these tomatoes myself. Mr. Nathan taught me how. And somehow, inexplicably, Marcus found himself being led through the garden by a 9-year-old girl who chattered about soil pH and companion planting as if she were discussing the weather. Nathan followed at a distance, watching his former rival's face soften as Sophie showed him her corner of the garden, the section dedicated to healing plants that she grew specifically for her mother's lupus symptoms. This is where the magic happens, Sophie said seriously. Kneeling beside a patch of herbs, when people are sick or sad, sometimes the earth knows how to help them feel better. Marcus knelt beside her, his expensive suit forgotten. Who taught you that? My daddy Nathan. But also my mama and Emma, and the books in our library. Do you have a garden? No, Marcus said quietly. I live in a building where gardens aren't allowed. Sophie's eyes widened with sympathy. Sounds lonely. It is, Marcus admitted. And Nathan realized his rival was speaking to this child with more honesty than he'd probably shown another human being in years. The conversation between Sophie and Marcus continued for an hour. Nathan watched from the community center steps as his former rival listened to a 9-year-old explain the difference between seeds that grew fast and seeds that grew strong, between plants that needed lots of attention and plants that thrived on neglect. When it was time for Marcus to leave, Sophie presented him with a small pot containing a single sunflower seedling. This is for your house, she said. Sunflowers always grow toward the light, even when it's cloudy. Maybe it'll help you remember that there's always something bright to look at. Marcus accepted the pot with hands that shook slightly. You, he said, his voice thick with something Nathan had never heard from him before, genuine emotion. As Marcus walked back to his car, he passed Nathan on the steps. Your daughter is... dub. Marcus paused, searching for words. She's extraordinary. She is, Nathan agreed. They all are. Marcus looked back at the party where Emma was organizing a group dance and Lily was introducing families to the therapy. Animals, this whole place is extraordinary. Thank you. Marcus hesitated, his hand on his car door. Nathan, I owe you an apology. I thought you'd lost your mind. I thought destroying you was justified because you'd destroyed yourself. First, and now. Now I think maybe I'm the one who's lost. Marcus drove away, leaving Nathan standing on the steps with Sophie's painting still in his hands and the sound of his community celebrating in the background. 3 months later, Nathan received a letter. No return address, but he recognized The handwriting from 1,000 business memos? Nathan, the letter read, I've been thinking about what your daughter said about sunflowers. I've also been thinking about what you said about being poor in your penthouse. I'm writing to let you know that I've withdrawn all legal challenges against your community trust. More than that, I'm liquidating some of my holdings to establish a fund for similar community development projects in other cities. I'm calling it the Sophie Fund, if that's all right with you. Perhaps it's time I learned to grow something other than my bank account. Your friend, I hope, Marcus. Nathan read the letter 3 times, then walked to the kitchen where Rachel was preparing dinner. Marcus is funding community trusts in other cities, he told her, handing her the letter. Rachel read it, her eyebrows rising. Sophie's going to be insufferable when she finds out she's got a fund named after her. She'll probably want to start a board of directors consisting entirely of 9-year-olds. They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who'd learned that the best gifts often came disguised as problems. Asterisk. The board meeting was a bloodbath. Nathan's announcement that he was liquidating his holdings to fund a community trust sent his fellow executives into apoplectic rage. Accusations of mental breakdown flew. Threats of lawsuits filled the air. You're destroying the company, his former mentor shouted. Decades of work, thousands of jobs. I'm not destroying anything, Nathan replied calmly. I'm transforming it. You wanted to build luxury condos for the wealthy? I'm building something better, a community where families can thrive? The vote was inevitable. By noon, Nathan was no longer CEO of Hale Enterprises. By evening, the community trust owned 43 buildings in a 6-block radius of Grove Street. Nathan's personal net worth had dropped from 9 figures to 5 figures overnight. He kept only enough money to rent a small apartment tyrannically. In the same building where Rachel and the girls lived, the media circus was spectacular. "Oh, millionaire CEO gives away fortune to save poor neighborhood," screamed the headlines. Nathan ignored them all. Instead, he spent that first evening in his new studio apartments, smaller than his old bathroom, eating pizza. With 3 little girls who didn't care that he was no longer rich, they cared that he was still there. You sad that you're not the boss anymore? Emma asked, tomato sauce on her chin. No, Nathan said, and realized he meant it. I was never really the boss of anything important. What were you the boss of? Lily wanted to know. Nathan thought about it. Buildings, money, people in suits who talked about numbers all day. Sophie wrinkled her nose. That sounds boring. Nathan laughed. Very, very boring. Asterisk. Nathan's new life taught him lessons no business school had ever covered. Like how to stretch a $20 grocery budget across a week without anyone feeling deprived. How to fix a broken washing machine with spare parts and determination. How to mediate disputes between neighbors who'd lived too close, together for too long. But the deepest lessons came from the girls themselves. Emma taught him about leadership through service. At 12, she was already organizing clothing drives for newer families in the community, tutoring struggling classmates, and somehow managing to make everyone feel important and included. How do you do it? Nathan asked her one evening as they watched her coordinate a group of teenagers in organizing. The community center's supply closet. Do what? Make everyone want to help. Make everyone feel like they belong. Emma considered this seriously. I guess I just remember how it felt when we didn't belong anywhere. I don't want anyone else to feel like that. Lily taught him about abundance. Despite having less than most of her classmates, she approached the world as if it were overflowing with gifts, waiting to be discovered. She found homes for stray animals, beauty in abandoned lots, potential in broken things. Lily, Nathan said one day as she nursed an injured pigeon back to health, you give away everything you have. Aren't you ever afraid of running out? Lily looked at him with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. Daddy Nathan, love isn't like money. When you spend love, you don't have less of it. You have more. Sophie taught him about seeing. She noticed things others missed, the way Mrs. Chen's hands shook on bad arthritis days. How Mr. Patterson's smile never quite reached his eyes when he talked about his late wife. When Rachel was pushing herself too hard and needed someone to insist she rest. Sophie sees people's hearts. Rachel told Nathan one evening as they watched their youngest daughter quietly bring Mr. Patterson a cup of tea. without being asked. She always has. Where did that come from? I think some people are just born understanding that we're all connected. That when one person hurts, we all hurt a little bit. As Nathan watched Sophie settle beside Mr. Patterson, sharing her coloring book with the old man, he realized that his daughter was teaching him the most important lesson of all. Wealth wasn't something you accumulated, but something you became when you learned to see the value in every person you met. Asterisk on a warm June evening. 5 years after that first meeting in the alley, Nathan received an unexpected visitor. His father stood at the door of his small apartment, holding a suitcase and looking uncertain for the first time in Nathan's memory. "Dad, I've been thinking," Richard said without preamble, "about what you said, about showing up." Nathan invited him in, noting how his father's eyes took in the simple space, the second-hand furniture, the girls' artwork covering every wall, the kitchen table where homework battles were fought and won every night. "Where will I sleep?" Richard asked, and Nathan realized his father wasn't just visiting, he was moving in. "The couch pulls out into a bed," Nathan said carefully. "But Dad, what's this about?" Richard set down his suitcase and walked to the window that looked out over the community garden. "Your mother died 23 years ago," he said quietly, "and I just realized I've been dead for 22 of them." Nathan felt his throat tighten. His parents had been devoted to each other in a way that had sometimes made Nathan feel like an outsider in his own family. When cancer took his mother, Richard had thrown himself into work with the desperate energy of a man trying to outrun grief. "I built that company for her," Richard continued. "Every deal, every acquisition, every dollar, it was all supposed to be for her. And when she was gone, I kept building because I didn't know how to stop. I handed it to you because I thought that's what she would have wanted. Dad, but watching you with those girls, seeing how you love them, how they love you back, I realized I never taught you the most important thing, which was..." Richard turned from the window, his eyes bright with tears. "I never taught you that success without love is just expensive failure." That evening, 3 little girls came home to find their grandfather reading in their daddy's living room. The introductions were cautious at first. Richard Hale was not. A man accustomed to children, the girls had learned to be wary of well-dressed strangers. But Sophie, with her gift for seeing hearts, approached him first. "Are you sad?" she asked simply. Richard looked down at her serious little face. "Yes," he said. "I think I've been sad for a very long time." "Sad is okay," Sophie said with the wisdom of a child who'd comforted her mother through many difficult nights. "But you don't have to be sad alone." She climbed onto the couch beside him, opened her coloring book, and very carefully tore out a picture she'd colored of a rainbow. "This is for you," she said, handing him the page. "Rainbows come after storms. Mama taught me that." Richard stared at the simple drawing crayon strokes in bold primary colors, a child's interpretation of hope itself. When he looked up, his cheeks were wet. "Thank you," he whispered. And just like that, Nathan's family grew by one. Richard's presence changed the dynamic of their small family in unexpected ways. The man who'd once ruled a corporate empire with an iron fist proved to be surprisingly gentle with 3 little girls, who challenged him to see the world through their eyes. He taught Emma advanced chess strategies, delighting in her quick mind and competitive spirit. He helped Lily research animal behavior for her pet therapy program, amazed by her intuitive understanding of creature comfort. And with Sophie, he discovered a shared love of building things, not corporate empires, but birdhouses and garden, trellises and small works of art that served no purpose except to bring joy. "You're good with them," Rachel observed one evening, as they watched Richard help Sophie construct a fairy house from twigs and pebbles. "I'm learning," Richard replied. They're patient teachers. Nathan marveled at the transformation in his father. The man who'd once scheduled his affection like board meetings now spent hours lying on the floor, playing elaborate games of pretend with 3 little girls, who'd assigned him the role of Grandpa, King of the Garden Kingdom. But Richard's presence brought challenges too. His transition from corporate titan to community member wasn't always smooth. "Why are we fixing Mrs. Rodriguez's steps?" Richard asked one Saturday morning, as Nathan loaded tools into a borrowed truck. "Shouldn't the landlord handle that?" "We are the landlords," Nathan reminded him. "The community trust owns the building, remember? Surely we can hire someone, Dad. Look around you. Half the people in this neighborhood are one emergency away from financial disaster. We don't hire out what we can do ourselves. Richard struggled with this concept. He'd spent 60 years believing that manual labor was something you paid other people to do. The idea that a man with a college education would choose to fix plumbing and paint walls challenged everything he'd been taught about success and status. But slowly, Richard began to understand. When he helped Mrs. Rodriguez carry groceries up those newly repaired steps, and she thanked him with tears in her eyes, something clicked. When he taught the Johnson twins how to change a tire and saw their pride in learning a useful skill, something softened in his chest. It's not about the work, Nathan explained one evening as they sat on the community center steps. Watching the girls play in the garden, it's about being useful. It's about knowing that you matter to people who matter to you. Richard nodded slowly. I spent 40 years building a company, and at the end of it, the only person who would miss me if I disappeared was my accountant. And now, Richard gestured toward the garden, where Sophie was showing a group of children how to harvest beans, where Emma was organizing a game of capture the flag, where Lily was introducing a new rescue dog to its potential adopters. Now I know that if I disappeared, 3 little girls would remember the fairy houses we built together. Mrs. Chen would miss our morning conversations about her herb garden. The chess club would need a new tournament organizer. Richard's voice grew thoughtful. Spent my whole life trying to build something that would last forever. Turns out I just needed to build something that would matter to someone. Asterisk, just when Nathan thought their life had found its rhythm, a new challenge emerged. The community trust had been so successful that other neighborhoods were requesting help replicating their model. The city council offered Nathan a position as director of community development, a role that would allow him to expand their work citywide. It's a good opportunity, Rachel said as they discussed the offer over dinner. You could help thousands of families, but it would mean less time. Here, Nathan pointed out, less time with you, with the girls, with our neighbors. The girls, now 10, 11, and nearly 12, had strong opinions about the decision. You should take it, Emma said firmly. Other kids need what we have. We need you too, Lily added, voicing the concern they all felt. Sophie, ever the philosopher, offered a different perspective. Maybe the question isn't whether you should help more people. Maybe the question is how we can all help more people together. Her words sparked an idea that kept Nathan awake that night. What if they didn't have to choose between expanding their impact and maintaining their family bond? What if the family itself became the model? The next morning, Nathan called the city council with a counteroffer. Instead of him taking a traditional, bureaucratic role, what if the Grove Street Community Trust became a training center? A place where other communities could send representatives to learn hands-on how to build their own cooperative housing models? We'd be teachers, Nathan explained to Rachel and the girls. All of us. Showing people how to turn neighborhoods into families. The program launched 6 months later. Every month, delegations from struggling communities across the Midwest came to Grove Street for intensive week-long workshops. They learned practical skills, budget management, conflict resolution, cooperative decision-making. But more importantly, they experienced what community felt like when it was built on mutual aid rather than individual competition. Nathan's role evolved into something he'd never imagined. Part teacher, part social worker, part family counselor. He helped delegates understand that successful communities weren't built from the top down, but from the ground up, one relationship at a time. The girls became integral to the program. Emma led workshops on youth leadership, showing visiting children how to organize projects and include everyone. Lily ran sessions on community building through shared care, how taking care of animals, gardens, and elderly neighbors created bonds that held neighborhoods together. Sophie offered art therapy workshops, teaching both children and adults how to express their hopes and fears through creative work. Rachel, meanwhile, had become a nationally recognized expert on community-controlled development. She spoke at conferences, consulted with city planners, and wrote articles about the economics of care. But she never forgot that her most important work happened at home. Around their dinner table, where four people who'd found each other continued to figure out how to be a family. "Sometimes I can't believe this is our life," Rachel said one evening, as they watched a group of visiting delegates learn to play chess with Mr. Patterson in the garden. "Sometimes I can't believe my old life was real," Nathan replied, pulling her clothes. The board meeting was a bloodbath. Nathan's announcement that he was liquidating his holdings to fund a community trust sent his fellow executives into apoplectic rage. Accusations of mental breakdown flew. Threats of lawsuits filled the air. "You're destroying the company," his former mentor shouted. "Decades of work, thousands of jobs." "I'm not destroying anything," Nathan replied calmly. "I'm transforming it." "You wanted to build luxury condos for the wealthy? Building something better? A community where families can thrive?" The vote was inevitable. By noon, Nathan was no longer CEO of Hale Enterprises. By evening, the community trust owned 43 buildings in a 6-block radius of Grove Street. Nathan's personal net worth had dropped from 9 figures to 5 figures overnight. He kept only enough money to rent a small apartment, ironically. In the same building where Rachel and the girls lived, the media circus was spectacular. "Millionaire CEO gives away fortune to save poor neighborhood," screamed the headlines. Nathan ignored them all instead. He spent that first evening in his new studio apartment smaller than his old bathroom eating pizza. With 3 little girls who didn't care that he was no longer rich, they cared that he was still there. "Are you sad that you're not the boss anymore?" Emma asked, tomato sauce on her chin. "No," Nathan said, and realized he meant it. "I was never really the boss of anything important." "What were you the boss of?" Lily wanted to know. Nathan thought about it. "Buildings, money, people in suits who talked about numbers all day." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "That sounds boring." It was Nathan laughed. "It's very, very boring." 5 years later, Nathan Hale stood in the community garden that had replaced the parking lot behind the Grove Street buildings. The space bloomed with vegetables and flowers tended by residents who'd learned that growing things together was a kind of magic. At 33, Nathan looked older than his years. His hair showed threads of silver. His hands bore the permanent stains of honest work. But his eyes held a light that hadn't been there during his millionaire days. Emma, 11, was leading a group of younger children and harvesting tomatoes for the community center's lunch program. She moved with the easy confidence of a girl who'd learned that helping others was the most natural thing in the world. Lily had talked Nathan into expanding her pet adoption program into a full animal therapy initiative. She was currently introducing a rescued therapy dog to Mrs. Patterson, whose chess club had grown to include children from 3 neighborhoods. Sophie, still the quiet artist, was painting a mural on the side of the community center 3 princesses, holding hands as they looked up at a castle that looked suspiciously like the buildings surrounding them. "The reporter's here," Rachel said, appearing at Nathan's elbow. Wore a simple dress and her wedding ring, Nathan's grandmother's ring, which he'd given her on a spring morning when the girls had asked if they could call him Daddy for real. Nathan nodded toward the young journalist who was setting up his camera near the garden's entrance. Another story about the CEO who gave it all away. They came regularly, now reporters, filmmakers, academics, studying his model of community development. "What should I tell him?" Nathan asked. Rachel smiled, that warm smile that had become his anchor. "Tell him the truth. You didn't give anything away. You found everything you'd been looking for." The interview was routine. The same questions Nathan had answered a dozen times before. Why did you do it? Do you regret it? What advice would you give to other wealthy individuals? But as Nathan spoke, he found himself looking past the camera to where the girls were playing. Emma was teaching a new child how to plant seeds. Lily was explaining to anyone who'd listen that the rabbits in the garden weren't pests, they were neighbors. Sophie was sitting quietly with old Mr. Patterson, both of them feeding the therapy dog scraps from their lunch. "The thing people don't understand," Nathan told the reporter, "is that I wasn't being generous. I was being selfish. Those girls saved my life, and I was just trying to save theirs back." "But you lost hundreds of millions of dollars," the reporter pressed. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma help her sisters reach a high tomato. "Have you ever been truly hungry?" he asked finally. "Not just skipping lunch, but genuinely, desperately hungry?" The reporter shook his head. I was starving for 30 years, Nathan said. I just didn't know it. I was feeding myself money and success and status, but my soul was wasting away. Those 3 little girls, they showed me what real nourishment looked like. The reporter scribbled notes, probably not understanding. That was fine. Nathan had learned that some truths could only be lived, not explained. When the interview ended and the camera crew packed up, Nathan walked through the garden, checking. On the various plots maintained by neighborhood families, Mrs. Chen was tending her herbs. The ones she used in the small restaurant she'd opened in the building's ground floor. The Johnson twins were arguing over who got to water the strawberries. Young Marcus, whose mother worked 2 jobs, was carefully weeding around the pepper plants he'd claimed as his own responsibility. This was Nathan's empire now. It's not steel and glass towers, but living, growing things. It's not profit margins, but people. Margins. Not stockholders, but stakeholders, in the truest sense people, who held stakes in each other's well-being. As the sun began to set, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber, Rachel appeared beside him again. "Any regrets?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. Nathan looked around at their small kingdom, at the laughter of children, at the pride of families caring for their own space, at the simple miracle of people choosing to build something together rather than tear each other down. "Just one," he said. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "I wish I'd been brave enough to do it sooner." That night, as Nathan tucked the girls into their real beds now, in a larger apartment they'd moved to within the same building, each daughter had a request. "Tell us the story," Emma said, as she always did. "Which story?" Nathan asked. Though he knew the answer. "A story about the man who was lost," Lily chimed in. "And the 3 princesses who found him," Sophie added, in her soft voice. Nathan settled into the chair between their beds, the same chair he'd sat in every night for 3 years now.
Wow.
The one Rachel had found abandoned on the street and Sophie had painted with stars and moons. Once upon a time, Nathan began, there was a man who had everything and nothing. He lived in a tower so high he couldn't see the ground, and he thought that made him closer to heaven. But really, it just made him farther from home. The girls snuggled deeper into their blankets, even though they knew this story by heart. Cold night, this man met 3 princesses who were disguised as ordinary little girls. They were testing him, though he didn't know it. They asked him for the smallest thing, just his leftover food, and when he gave it to them, they gave him something in return. What did they give him? The girls asked in unison, their voices sleepy but attentive. They gave him eyes that could see, a heart that could feel. Most importantly, they gave him a family. "And did he live happily ever after?" Emma asked. Nathan looked around the room at the drawings on the walls, at the stuffed animals that had been loved thin, at the 3 faces watching him with trust and affection. Through the open door, he could see Rachel in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner, humming a song under her breath. "He lived truly ever after," Nathan said, "which is even better." Asterisk, and so ends the tale of Nathan Hale, the man who discovered that the poorest person in the world is not the one without money, but the one without people worth sharing it with. 10 years have passed since that November night when 3 small voices asked for leftovers. Emma now studies medicine, determined to heal the world one patient at a time. Lily runs the city's largest animal therapy program. Sophie creates art that hangs in galleries and homeless shelters alike. Nathan and Rachel raised not just 3 daughters, but an entire community that learned to see wealth where others saw poverty. The Grove Street model has spread to 47 cities. Marcus Steinberg became Nathan's closest friend and co-founder of what they call the Sunflower Initiative, communities that always grow toward the light. And Nathan? He still lives in that small apartment, rich beyond measure in the currency. That matters most. Love that multiplies when shared, purpose that deepens with service. And the profound joy of knowing that 3 little girls asking for scraps had saved not just his soul, but his understanding of what it truly means to be human. Sometimes the greatest fortunes are found in empty hands willing to give. And the richest inheritance is teaching others to do the same.